The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. No one expected a routine meeting between the city's police chief and a high-ranking army general to spiral into chaos. But that's exactly what happened. What started as a simple conversation quickly escalated into a shocking display of power, arrogance, and outright disrespect, one that would cost the police chief his job and shake the entire community. It all began when General Marcus Reynolds, a decorated officer with years of service under his belt, walked into the police headquarters for what should have been a professional discussion. He was there to address concerns about collaboration between the military and local law enforcement. But instead of a civil exchange, he found himself face-to-face with Police Chief David Langston, a man known for his short temper and a deep sense of authority. Witnesses say Chief Langston greeted the general with an attitude that was anything but respectful. At first, it was subtle, dismissive remarks, an unwillingness to engage in serious conversation. But then, things took a darker turn. In a moment that left everyone stunned, Langston allegedly insulted the general, questioning his authority and belittling his position. And then the unthinkable happened. He reached for his service weapon, pointing it directly at General Reynolds. For a brief, terrifying moment, no one moved. Officers in the room froze, unsure whether to intervene or wait for their chief to stand down. Reynolds, a man who had faced war zones and life-or-death situations, remained calm, but the look in his eyes said everything. He knew this had gone too far. What happened next would send shockwaves through the department and beyond. Within hours, the news spread. Calls were made, statements were taken, and before Langston could even grasp the weight of his actions, the mayor's office got involved. By the next morning, the decision was final. Police Chief David Langston was fired, effective immediately. But was this just a case of one man's ego getting out of control, or was there something deeper behind his actions? Some believe this wasn't an isolated incident, that Langston had a history of pushing boundaries and abusing his power. Others say tensions between law enforcement and the military had been brewing for a while, and this was just the moment it all boiled over. One thing is clear, this isn't just about a fired police chief. It's about power, respect, and the dangerous line that some people are willing to cross. But the real question remains, what will happen next? And could there be more to this story than what meets the eye? Stay with us as we break down every shocking detail, uncover hidden truths, and reveal what this means for the future of law enforcement in the city. This is a story you don't want to miss. The fallout from the shocking incident spread like wildfire. By the afternoon, news stations were already running the story, social media was in an uproar, and people across the city were demanding answers. How could the chief of police, a man trusted with upholding the law, openly threaten a high-ranking military official? And why? Those who had worked under Chief Langston weren't exactly surprised. While he had always maintained a public image of authority and discipline, there were whispers in the department, stories of officers who had seen a different side of him. Some said he had a history of overstepping boundaries, using his badge as a shield for his temper. Others claimed he had always viewed the military as competition rather than an ally, especially when federal forces were called in during times of crisis. But even those who had questioned his leadership never expected anything like this. On the other hand, General Marcus Reynolds was a man known for his calm, calculated nature. Having served in high-pressure combat zones, he was no stranger to confrontation. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was a meeting between two men in positions of power, one of whom had completely lost control. What made it even more alarming was how Reynolds had handled it. He never reacted in anger, never raised his voice. Those present in the room described the eerie stillness as the general simply stared down the barrel of the chief's gun, his expression unreadable. It was as if he had seen something like this before, something no one else in that room understood. But why? Why would Chief Langston risk everything in such a reckless moment? Some believe it was nothing more than ego, a man used to being the highest authority in the room, finally meeting someone he couldn't intimidate. Others suspect there was more to it. Was there a personal grudge between the two? Had something happened between law enforcement and the military that the public didn't know about? And if so, what exactly had pushed Langston over the edge? Behind closed doors, city officials scrambled to contain the damage. The mayor's office issued a statement distancing itself from Langston's actions, emphasizing that his behavior did not reflect the values of the department. The police union remained silent, unsure of how to handle a scandal of this magnitude. But the most telling reaction came from inside the department itself. Some officers quietly celebrated his removal, relieved to see a man they had long feared finally face consequences. Others, however, were more hesitant, questioning whether there was a bigger story behind the headlines. Meanwhile, Langston himself refused to speak to the press. Reports say he left the station that night in silence, his face unreadable, his career in ruins. But those who knew him best say he wasn't just angry, he was determined. Whatever had happened in that room, whatever had caused him to snap, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And as more details began to surface, one thing became increasingly clear. This story was far from finished. As the days passed, the story only grew more complicated. The official reports stated the facts. Chief Langston had pointed his weapon at General Reynolds during a heated exchange, and he had been removed from his position. But behind the scenes, people were asking a bigger question. Why did it happen in the first place? And why did it feel like there was more to the story than anyone was willing to admit? Some officers who had worked closely with Langston claimed that in the weeks leading up to the incident, he had become increasingly paranoid. He started holding private meetings, speaking in hushed tones, and refusing to let certain cases be handled without his direct approval. Some thought it was just stress. After all, being chief of police was no easy job. But others suspected something deeper. Had he been hiding something? Was there an internal issue within the department that had made him feel threatened? Then there was General Reynolds. Unlike Langston, he was used to secrecy. Years of classified missions and high-level security briefings had made him an expert at keeping information tightly controlled. While he hadn't spoken publicly about the incident, there were rumors that he had been looking into something involving the police department long before the meeting. Could he have uncovered something that Langston didn't want coming to light? One of the strangest parts of the story was how quickly Langston had been fired. Typically, an investigation would have taken weeks, maybe months. But in this case, the decision was almost immediate. It was as if city officials wanted him out before any more questions could be asked. Some believed it was just damage control, a way to protect the city's reputation. But others whispered about a cover-up, something bigger than just one man losing his temper. Meanwhile, Langston himself had all but disappeared. Reports said he had left the city, retreating to a private property on the outskirts of town. Some thought he was planning a legal fight to get his job back. Others believed he was trying to escape the spotlight. But a few suspected something much stranger, that Langston wasn't just hiding, he was waiting. At the same time, anonymous sources began leaking strange details. Documents surfaced suggesting that the police department had been involved in an operation that wasn't entirely legal, something about off-the-record surveillance and unauthorized investigations. While nothing was confirmed, the whispers were enough to keep the public's curiosity growing. The officers who had been in the room during the confrontation were also starting to talk, though not on the record. One officer, speaking under the condition of anonymity, claimed that when Langston pulled his gun on Reynolds, he said something chilling, something that hadn't been included in any of the official reports. "You think you can just walk in here and expose everything?" It was a statement that raised even more questions. What was Langston afraid of being exposed? What had Reynolds been looking into? And more importantly, how far would some people go to keep the truth buried? The more people dug into the story, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about one bad decision in a tense moment. There was something much deeper going on, something that neither Langston nor Reynolds was willing to talk about. And the closer people got to the truth, the more dangerous the situation became. The more people tried to uncover the truth, the more questions surfaced. The police department remained tight-lipped, refusing to comment on any of the growing suspicions. General Reynolds continued his silence, avoiding reporters and declining interviews. And Chief Langston, once the most powerful law enforcement officer in the city, was nowhere to be found. Then, a break in the story sent everything into a tailspin. A journalist investigating Langston's past received an anonymous tip, a folder left on his doorstep, no name, no explanation. Inside were documents, reports stamped confidential, and a series of names connected to both the police department and the military. It wasn't clear what the files meant, but one thing stood out. There was a pattern. A series of incidents that had been quietly handled, swept under the rug, hidden from public view. And at the center of it all, Langston and Reynolds. The journalist began reaching out to sources, but something strange happened. People who had been willing to talk before suddenly changed their minds. Officers who had whispered about Langston's paranoia now refused to speak at all. Some even went as far as denying they had ever said anything in the first place. It was as if a shadow had fallen over the investigation. Someone somewhere didn't want this information getting out. Then, another shock. The journalist received an email, short and cryptic. ***, stop asking questions. This isn't your fight. ***, no sender, no traceable IP address. Just a warning. But from who? Someone in the police department? Someone higher up? Or was it Langston himself? Meanwhile, whispers about Langston's whereabouts grew darker. Some believed he had gone into hiding to protect himself. Others claimed he was gathering allies, preparing to fight back against those who had forced him out. And then there was the most unsettling theory of all, that he was planning something much bigger, something that no one saw coming. As the journalist pieced together the clues, he started to notice something chilling. Every name in those documents had either resigned, been transferred, or, more disturbingly, disappeared under unusual circumstances. Was this a coincidence, or had these people been silenced? And if so, who was responsible? Then one night, a breaking news alert flashed across every screen in the city. Police had been called to a remote cabin on the outskirts of town, a property linked to none other than David Langston. Details were scarce, but the early reports said something alarming. Multiple gunshots had been heard, and there were signs of a struggle. But that wasn't the most shocking part. What sent waves of panic through the city was the unconfirmed but explosive rumor that General Reynolds had been seen near the scene. If that was true, then the story had just taken a deadly turn. What had really happened at that cabin? Was this the moment everything would come to light, or was the truth about to be buried forever? The city held its breath, waiting for answers. But something about this entire situation felt wrong, like the biggest twist was still yet to come. The cabin was swarming with law enforcement by the time reporters arrived, their cameras flashing against the dense tree line that surrounded the remote property. Officers moved in and out of the scene, their faces tense, their conversations hushed. No one knew exactly what had happened yet, but one thing was clear. Whatever had gone down in that cabin wasn't just another routine call. As the first official reports surfaced, the mystery only deepened. There were clear signs of a struggle: overturned furniture, bullet holes in the walls, and blood on the floor. But there was one problem: no bodies. David Langston was nowhere to be found, and neither was General Reynolds. The news sent shockwaves through the city. How could two of the most talked-about men in this entire scandal vanish without a trace? Had Langston lured Reynolds there for a final confrontation? Had Reynolds gotten there first? Or was there someone else involved, someone pulling the strings behind the scenes? Authorities launched a search, combing through the woods, tracking footprints, searching for any clue that would explain what had happened in those final moments before gunfire rang out. But the deeper they dug, the stranger things got. A witness, a local hunter who had been in the area, claimed he had seen two figures outside the cabin just before the shots were fired. One of them, he said, matched Langston's description, but the second figure— the witness swore it wasn't Reynolds. It was someone else. Someone the authorities weren't talking about. And then came the second twist, something no one had seen coming. A car, abandoned on the side of a highway just a few miles from the cabin, was discovered in the early hours of the morning. The license plate, registered to General Marcus Reynolds, but inside there was no sign of the general himself. Instead, there was a single object left behind in the driver's seat, an old police badge, covered in fresh blood, and it didn't belong to Langston. The discovery sent investigators into a frenzy. If Reynolds had left his car there, where had he gone? And more importantly, who had left that badge? Was it a message? A warning? Or proof that someone else had been caught up in whatever had happened at that cabin? As reporters tried to make sense of the chaos, a chilling realization began to set in. This wasn't just about a fired police chief. It wasn't just about a confrontation between two powerful men. There was something much larger happening, something that had been hidden for a long time, only now beginning to surface. And if Langston and Reynolds had both disappeared, that meant one of two things. Either they were running from something, or someone didn't want them to be found. The city was left holding its breath, waiting for the next development. But with every passing hour, one question became harder to ignore. Was this about uncovering the truth, or had the truth itself just become too dangerous? For 2 days, the city was in a state of uncertainty. With Langston and Reynolds missing, and the abandoned car raising more questions than answers, speculation ran wild. Had one of them killed the other? Had they both fled? Or was something far more dangerous at play? Then, everything changed. A hiker, walking through a dense stretch of forest miles away from the cabin, stumbled upon something chilling. Lying near the base of a tree was a man, unconscious, bloodied but alive. It was General Marcus Reynolds. Paramedics arrived within minutes, and Reynolds was rushed to the hospital under heavy security. Though weak, he managed to say 3 words before losing consciousness again. Asterisk, asterisk, it wasn't him. Asterisk, asterisk. The statement sent shockwaves through the investigation. If it wasn't Langston, then who had attacked him? And more importantly, where was Langston now? As detectives searched the area, they found something even more disturbing: a hidden underground bunker, covered by layers of brush and dirt. It wasn't just any bunker. It had been recently used. Inside, they discovered surveillance equipment, old case files, and walls lined with photographs. Some of the photos were of police officers. Others were of military personnel. And then, at the center of it all, one image stood out: a photograph of Langston and Reynolds, taken years ago, standing together in what appeared to be a classified military facility. That was when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Langston and Reynolds weren't enemies. They were connected by something much older, something deeper. They had worked together before, in operations never meant to see the light of day. And now someone had been trying to erase their past and their present. Then, the final twist. Late that night, a security breach was reported at the hospital. By the time guards reached Reynolds' room, the bed was empty. The cameras had been disabled. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of forced entry. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. And just when it seemed like the story couldn't get any stranger, a letter arrived at the newsroom of the journalist who had been following the case from the beginning. There was no return address, no fingerprints, just a few lines written in ink. Asterisk, asterisk, you were never supposed to find out. Stop looking, stop asking, or you'll disappear too. Asterisk, asterisk. The journalist read the words over and over, a chill running down his spine. Was it a warning? A threat? Or a final clue from someone on the inside? One thing was clear. This wasn't just about a police chief pulling a gun on a general. It was about something much bigger, something buried deep in the past. And now, with Langston missing, Reynolds gone, and more questions than ever, the only thing left was the uneasy realization that whoever was behind, this wasn't finished yet. Not even close. The newsroom was silent as the journalist stared at the letter in his hands. The weight of everything that had happened over the past few weeks pressed down on him. A police chief fired for pointing a gun at a general. A confrontation that had spiraled into something far more dangerous. A hidden past that had somehow resurfaced, leaving two powerful men missing and a trail of unanswered questions. Now this letter, one final warning, or maybe a challenge. Despite the fear creeping in, he knew he couldn't just walk away. He had come too far, uncovered too much. But before he could decide his next move, something unexpected happened. An anonymous tip arrived in his inbox, a set of coordinates. No message, no explanation, just numbers. Following a hunch, he passed the information to a trusted contact in law enforcement. Hours later, a team was dispatched to the remote location deep in the countryside. What they found was shocking. An abandoned vehicle, its engines still warm. Inside, a police-issued radio, a military ID, and a single cryptic note written on a scrap of paper. Asterisk, asterisk, it was never about us. It was about what we knew. Asterisk, asterisk. The handwriting was familiar. It was Langston's. The discovery confirmed what many had begun to suspect. Langston and Reynolds hadn't just disappeared. They were on the run, hiding from something far bigger than anyone realized. But what did they know that made them such a threat? And who was trying so hard to erase them? Authorities issued statements saying they would continue investigating. But the truth was, there was little they could do. Without leads, without witnesses willing to speak, and with two of the most powerful men in the city now ghosts, the case had reached a dead end. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the story faded from the headlines. The media moved on, city officials pushed it aside, and people stopped asking questions. But for those who had followed the case closely, there was an unsettling feeling that lingered, like an unfinished chapter in a book that someone had ripped out before the final pages could be read. The journalist, still haunted by the letter he had received, tried to let it go. But every so often, when the city was quiet and the world seemed to move on, he would wonder. Was Langston still out there, watching from the shadows? Had Reynolds found a way to disappear for good? And most importantly, what was the secret they had uncovered that made them such a target? Then one night, as he locked up his office, he noticed something odd. His desk drawer, the one where he had stored every note, every file, every lead from the case, was slightly open. His heart pounded as he reached for it. The documents were still there, but one was missing. The letter, the final warning. Gone. He stood there in silence, his mind racing. Someone had been here. Someone had taken it. And that meant one thing. Whoever had tried to bury the truth wasn't finished yet. And maybe, just maybe, neither were Langston and Reynolds.